It's painful for both parties, but I'd say Iran is not winning this war. And they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late. They should have done that before. I had 60 days, and they had 60 days, and on the 61st day, I said, we don't have a deal. We've always supported Israel. We have for a long period of time, strongly, and Israel's doing very well right now.
That was the President of the United States, Donald Trump, at the G7 in Banff, Canada, speaking to reporters. Welcome to this special episode of Beyond the Headlines, recorded on Tuesday, June 17th. I'm Manus Cranny, in for Mina Al-Oraibi, joined by our Editor-in-Chief, Mina Al-Oraibi, and Mohamad Ali Harisi, our foreign editor. This is the leaders of G7 begin their second day of meetings in Canada, urging de-escalation on the Iran-Israel conflict as it extends to its fifth day. President Trump departed early, warning the residents of Tehran everyone should immediately evacuate. Iran should have signed the deal I told them to sign. This was part of his communication on Truth Social. How Iran reacts as one of the key issues that will take place today. We understand there is back-channeling through Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Oman, potentially on de-escalation. Let's ask the editors for their inside view. To you, Mina, first of all, how would you describe the situation right now? Just how fragile is it?
It's not only fragile, but it's potentially the most dangerous we've seen it. It's certainly the most dangerous, actually. We've seen it since the October 7th, 2023 attacks, Hamas attacks on Israel, but also more dangerous than even the Iraq war of 2003. And the reason I say that is because, one, it is a direct war now between Iran and Israel. I don't think we can call it a conflict only. It's a war. The Israelis are hitting at key infrastructure of the country, from energy to military to media, including the state broadcaster. And so there's a question of where does this end? And nobody seems to really have an idea of what the end game goal is. So I would say not only incredibly fragile, but very dangerous.
Well, you draw that comparison very clearly with the Iran-Iraq war. And Ali, let's bring you into the conversation. That immediately brings to mind then regime change. And that is potentially what is at play here, the differential between what Israel wants to achieve and what the United States is prepared to get involved with. Are we in the foothills of regime change?
I think the Israelis wouldn't have started or launched this war unless they knew that they had a large and a huge bank of targets that could lead to a drastic and dramatic change in Tehran, and this could be a regime change. Now, how the US would support this, I think from the beginning of the operation, and we have seen the Americans saying that they are not directly involved in attacking Iran. But we have also seen the Americans saying that the moment the Iranians cross a certain line, they would become involved, and this would reinforce the idea that the US is standing by and waiting for any mistake to happen, or waiting for Iranians to pressure the Israelis a little bit more and maybe do bigger hits to interfere. And maybe the end game is to trick Iran into expanding this war and leading to a drastic and dramatic change in Tehran, which could be, like we said at the beginning, a regime change.
I mean, just on this point about regime change, we heard Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel making this clarion call to the people of Iran. The people that I speak to say this was media, this was hype, and that the people of Iran are very unlikely to respond to the calls from the Israeli leader. What do you make of that?
The Israeli leader was trying to position himself as a friend of the Iranian people, and very, very few Iranians see him as a friend. However, my enemy's enemy could be my friend. And there are Iranians, certainly, who are very much opposed to this regime. Not only Iranians abroad in exile and opposition, like, for example, the son of the Shah, who has openly made clear that he is for good relations with Israel, has visited Israel, but also Iranians inside of the country who are very much opposed to the regime. However, most of the Iranians inside the country, from what we can tell, there are no official polls to go by, but from what we understand, are not looking to Israel as their savior or their friend. So there's a real division. There's a division between Iranians who are pro-regime and are personally benefiting from its existence. And so of course they want the regime to stay. There are the Iranians who are opposed to the regime, but are much more opposed to Israel and would not want to be seen as changing the regime on the back of an Israeli missile or tank. So they will be torn because they're in opposition to the regime, but they very much don't like the Israelis. And then the third division or group of Iranians are those who are so resentful of this current regime that whatever means it may be, we want to append this order. And this happens in countries where there are dictatorships. We saw that in Libya, we saw that in Iraq, where any situation is better than the regime that we have. It's very hard to know what percentage these different groups represent from within Iran, and perhaps more importantly, what leverage the different groups have. And does the internal opposition have the bandwidth, the capacity, the military prowess to actually have an internal coup? My guess is not. If you suddenly had 2 million Iranians take to the streets, 3 million Iranians take to the streets and say, we want to now change the regime, that would be a different dynamic. Don't think that's the case. I think for many Iranians, they feel that their country is under attack, and so they are more likely to close ranks.
And this is the balancing act for the Supreme Leader Khamenei, which is to balance between trying to find some kind of a de-escalation and run the risk of, as Mina just said, the risk is a couple of million Iranians protesting on the streets and the real risk of some kind of a coup.
I wanted just to add that there are also Iranians helping the Israelis and the Americans achieve their goals on the ground. Now, we don't know the percentage of these Iranians, the killing of Hani, the assassinations, the other assassinations in Iran, the killing of the top generals. This wouldn't have happened without having agent and an Iranian hand on the ground. Now, how influential they are, who are they? This is the question yet to be answered. But I think that there is a feeling that there is some kind of an Iranian hand helping the Israelis and the Americans on the ground achieving their goals, and maybe some kind of mounting pressure on the regime to push for a big change. And Mina mentioned something very important, which is a coup d'etat. This is very unlikely in Iran, but it's not impossible. Iran has a huge army and it's a big country, and we never know who can try to take advantage and maybe try to cause a coup d'etat.
Let's just reflect on what's happening right now. The President of the United States has returned from the G7, Mina. He has called for the National Security Council to meet in the Situation Room. So the discussion, there's lots of press reports that I think from Axios that he was pushing for some kind of a US-Iran meeting, and yet here we are meeting in the Situation Room. When you hear headlines like that, where do you see the US and Donald Trump at the moment?
It is very hard to gauge what the thinking of the American president is at the moment, because his statements within a space of 24 hours could lead you to believe that he wants to come to a deal with the Iranians and will make sure that all sides push towards a compromise that can end the war, or could lead you to believe that he is willing to get involved militarily, which is already dividing his MAGA base, to end this, whatever end this means. So it's very hard to know which direction they will take. And that may be why he's calling for a meeting in the Situation Room to get an assessment of, one, the damage that's already happened to the Iranian infrastructure, nuclear and military, but two, what his options are. Because I think for him to make a decision which direction he will push for, he probably wants to get an update on what the situation on the ground is and what it would take to end the war, regardless of what the political outcome is.
And I think a lot of the next steps for the Americans, I look at it through the prism of oil and from potential disruption to the flow of oil and the price of oil. And it's those oil infrastructure is not being attacked at the moment. There is some minor drone attacks onshore in Iran on the gas infrastructure. But right now, the lifeblood of the world, and oil means a great deal to the US economy, to inflation, to the Federal Reserve, and to Trump. He wants low oil prices. Yes, we've spiked, but he does not want to get drawn into this unless American targets are hit here in the Gulf or in the Middle East. Ali, to you, to seriously debilitate Iran's enrichment program, is it going to take America to join in with Israel?
From what we've seen so far, all the attacks that Israel has done against the nuclear program haven't stopped the enrichment, and until now, there is a feeling that they won't. For example, the attack against the main facility in Natanz had minimal impact, according to reports by the IAEA. Even the one in Fordo, a few buildings were targeted, but it's a very, very protected facility, and it's really hard to penetrate it. So what needs to be done, like Mina said at the beginning, we don't know what the end game is. I think the Israelis know that they cannot destroy the whole nuclear program. And what they're trying to do is put as much pressure on the Iranian regime politically and domestically to try to reach a solution. Now, the solution is very hard to see because the Israelis and the Americans, they want the Iranians to give up enrichment, and the Iranians, they're saying that they won't do this. There might be a magic solution that come up, but for now, I think everyone know that it's very hard, and what has happened in the last few days proved that it's very unlikely that attacks against either from the Americans or from the Israelis would completely destroy the Iranian nuclear program.
But I would just add, there's another issue here, that it's not just militarily whether they can or not, but there is the issue of containment. I mean, they want to contain the nuclear program because to try to take it out completely, and there are bunker busting bombs that they could consider using, but the fallout in terms of pollution, air contamination, what it means for the region is huge. So there's the military capability, but there's also the calculus that when it comes to nuclear and what you want to destroy, the IAEA is following this very closely, but they can't just go out and bomb the place completely because of the repercussions of what that means for nuclear or chemical contamination for air particles, and that drifts all over.
And this is then to the bigger question, Mina, isn't it? Politically, in the United States, there's already a bill that's been brought forward to constrain any actual military engagement by the United States in this conflict, in this war. And that is something which may well restrain, if I can use that word, restrain Donald Trump?
This is not a war that Donald Trump wanted. He was very clear at the beginning of his term that he wants to make deals, and he wants to see a moment where he is seen as the best peacemaker, as the best deal maker. Going to war with Iran does not fit that bill. He also had hopes for the Nobel Prize. We've heard about this, that there's this fascination with being awarded a Nobel Prize for peace. Again, very difficult to do if there's a new war on his watch. And so I think that at the outset, Donald Trump wanted to make sure he doesn't end up in a new war in the Middle East. He promised that time and again. And again, his base are very clear about that. And you're already hearing some of his supporters come out and warn him that they will not tolerate a new war that the US is leading. Having said that, circumstances change. And if he feels that he will be seen as a coward, as somebody who doesn't step up when the circumstances change, etc., especially if it means that Israel will sustain major damage unless there's swift action, then he might change his calculus. And so I think in the coming days, what we have to watch is the calculus of President Trump and whether going to war, even though he had said that he would not, will serve a greater purpose. My instinct is he will try to avoid that at all costs. And then this congressional bill, in a way, actually helps him.
I mean, Ali, this is everything that President Trump did not want. As Mina just said, he wanted to perhaps have a Nobel Prize, but Ukraine-Russia is certainly not moving at pace to de-escalation. There is Iran, hot conflict with Israel, and Palestine is far from anywhere on a sure footing. This is foreign policy everything that this president did not want. And he needs a win overseas. He's just been to the region, doesn't he?
He does indeed, but the realities on the ground are much more complicated than just President Donald Trump saying that he wants a deal and a deal would happen. It's not that easy and it's not that simple. I just want to add that, Mina, you remember the meeting on April 8 between President Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And they both looked uneasy, and with Mr. Trump pushing for a deal and a quick deal with Iran, and Netanyahu being a little bit worried about the US having a direct contact with his biggest enemy. But the fact is that the strikes happened exactly 2 months after what was reported as a period of grace to produce results that President Trump has gave to his team. And the strikes happened a few hours after the deadline. And the main cover was the IAEA report saying that Iran has breached its obligations. It's like Trump wanted a quick deal, but at the same time, he and Netanyahu and Prime Minister Netanyahu had some kind of an understanding that if things don't work out quickly, there has to be some kind of a military action. I don't want to say that he was bluffing, but I want to say that the realities on the ground were much more complicated, and Iran didn't help at all. Iran thought that it still had the same leverage it had 10 years ago when they reached a deal. And probably the Iranians thought that they can still take their time and negotiate. And they didn't learn the lesson that their country and their intelligence and their military were exposed. And this was the main advantage for the Israelis and the main reason why they went after the Iranians hours after the 2 months deadline.
Mina, listening to that and reflecting, Ali, on that imagery of Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump in the Oval Office, it's very different to other world leaders, wasn't it, Mina, in terms of the actual physical body language, the verbal interaction? It was materially different. My question to you, Mina, is this relationship between Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you think that Netanyahu is running this campaign completely on his own terms, or does the president still have major influence over the direction of travel of this conflict and the escalation thereof, potentially?
I think Donald Trump does have influence, but won't call the final shots when it comes to Israel decision making, especially at this point. As you both rightly described, the dynamic between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu in the last 2 months has shifted, it's changed. And Netanyahu at the moment has the lead in the sense that he took matters in large part into his own hands, although of course the Americans were informed ahead of and clearly did not oppose the military action on Iran, otherwise they could have stopped it. But there is a dynamic now when Netanyahu is winning, and we know that Donald Trump likes winners. And so that will help him. I would say just a point on what Ali was referencing, which is hugely important, which is the Iranians overplayed their hand. They thought that Donald Trump wanted this deal more than anything else, and therefore they could take their time, they could demand more. And the reaction was the Americans turned around and said, actually, no uranium enrichment for you. And suddenly the stakes were much higher for the Iranians. They pushed back, and we got to this moment where the IAEA came out and said, actually, the Iranians had traces of uranium in places. They said there were no nuclear activities, and the rest is history. And so all of that played a big part. So the dynamic between Netanyahu and Donald Trump, as important as it is, can't be seen in isolation from these very tangible developments on the ground from the Iranians miscalculating, overplaying their hands at a time when actually they had a big advantage, because Donald Trump was very clear to Benjamin Netanyahu saying, I want to negotiate, I want to get a deal. And they did not seize that opportunity. That daylight that we saw between the two men now is much smaller and much less influential than previously.
Listening to what Mina's just said, Ali, the proxies are much debilitated for Iran. Listening to Mina's commentary there, do you think that this perhaps in the background creates more pressure and opportunity to find an off-ramp, a diplomatic solution, perhaps than we perceive right now, day 5 of this conflict?
Before I answer this question, I just want to comment on the dynamics between Netanyahu and Trump. And this is my own analysis. I watched the meeting a few times just to try to get a script out of it with the matching red ties and the body language, like you said, Manus. And then it reminded me of when President Trump was in the region, in the Gulf, and he was speaking about peace in Gaza. And then Prime Minister Netanyahu was just expanding the war in Gaza, doing completely the opposite. And now we're seeing how Mr. Trump or President Trump is pushing for a deal with Iran despite his recent statements, and Netanyahu is expanding the war with Iran. It's like, I feel it's like a good cop, bad cop game. And one of them is just trying to give the sense that war is off the table and there is a push for a wider peace in the region, and it might be true. And the other person is just saying that it won't be easy to reach this peace and these agreements in the region. Now, speaking of proxies, I mean, this is a great opportunity for a wider Middle East solution or a comprehensive agreement in the region. Hezbollah is weakened a lot. Hamas is not the same. The Iraqi militias are bound with a truce with the government and under continuous threat from the US forces in the country. There is only the Yemenis, and the Yemenis' end game is not Iran, is not the Middle East, is not Israel. The Houthis' end game is Yemen and trying to have a legitimate presence and authority in the country. So this is a great timing, but I think that the war on Iran and expanding the war on Iran has complicated things and has blocked what we have thought would be a comprehensive agreement very close to reach.
Well, as the headlines break and as the news rolls in, go to The National for your headlines every day, every morning, and a live update throughout the day. I'm Manus Cranny for The National, joined by our editor-in-chief, Mina Al-Oraibi, and Mohamad Ali Harisi, our foreign editor. That's it for Beyond the Headlines.